What I have here is what I believe to be the perfect setup for fishing offshore. I have two electronics at my driver's seat. I've got a 7-inch screen here, and on this one I'm going to run a big as screen as I can with my mapping, and I'm going to run a small slice of sonar. On my HDS-10 I'm going to run a real small screen of down scan, which is basically sonar, but I'm going to have my biggest screen set for my left and right structure scan image. That way I can see as much as I can when I'm scanning these ledges. Up front, I have an HDS-8, and I'm going to run mapping again as big as I can in a small stretch of sonar, because in sonar, the picture you're seeing that comes on the right is the current shit. Once you go beyond that, you don't need a whole screen of sonar. You want to see as big as detail as you can, your contour lines on your mapping, so you stay in position. Now I've got all three of my electronics networked, so when I'm sitting back here and I'm driving down a ledge, I find a school of fish on my structure scan, I can mark a waypoint on this one where the school starts, and once I find the school ends, I mark a second waypoint. I will have those two waypoints on all three of my electronics. All I'm going to do is turn back around, drive through that school one more time, and when I get to the end of the school, I will throw a buoy marker out on the shallow side of the ledge. I turn back around again, go all the way back down to my last waypoint, turn around. Now I know that school of fish is sitting between me and that buoy. And since I threw that buoy on the right side, on the shallow side, all I have to do is cast my bait from my boat to the left of that buoy, and I'm going to bring my bait through that school of bass every single time. You guys don't have to have three electronics on your boat and the great big screens and structure scan to find these fish offshore. I used to find them without it, but what you really do need at least is you need a depth finder that does have GPS and a good map card like a Navionics map chip. It's just standard map reading contour lines and creek channels. You can see these big schools of fish on your sonar just as good as you can on structure scan. You're going to see a pile of stuff on the bottom of your sonar, so you don't have to have all that expensive equipment to find fish offshore. But yes, it does help expedite the process and make it a little easier for you. First of all, you guys need the baits to use when you're fishing offshore. I've got a handful here because you don't need a whole lot that will catch you your fish offshore. Deep diving crankbaits, Strike King 6XD. It's a good search tool, and that thing will go 20 feet or more if you long line it. It's a 3/4 ounce football jig. This is a Whacking Baits football jig and crawfish. Anything natural colored, green pumpkin, with some brown or orange in it. It's so easy. I don't even use a Carolina rig. I'll just put a Rage Crawl trailer full size on this football jig, and that's a good search bait. Throw it out there, you can drag it across the bottom until you find some fish, and you know what the bottom feels like also. 10.5 inch monster worm. I throw it on a 5-aught Gamakatsu offset worm hook and a 1/2 ounce Eco Pro tungsten weight. I never go any lighter than a 1/2 ounce when I'm fishing ledges. I got two spoons for you guys here. The one in my left hand is actually 1.5 ounces and weighs more than this bigger one in my right hand. I'm going to use this 1.5 ounce spoon when I'm fishing deeper than 15 feet because I want my spoon to fall faster to get the reaction strike, and I'm fishing deeper water. I'll use this a bigger spoon but lighter. It's going to flutter slower. If I'm fishing less than 15 feet of water up on top of the ledge, I'm going to use this bigger spoon. Now, something you guys want to always do is you need to add a barrel swivel to the top of your spoon and another treble hook. That will increase your hookup ratio tenfold, and this barrel swivel will keep your line from twisting on you. And the last thing, which is one of my favorites, is a big swim bait. This is a 6-inch Bass Trick swim bait. on a Blade Runner swim bait head. It's 3/4 ounce. This thing comes with a weed guard, but I always pull it off because it fishes a lot like a spinner bait where it's going to slide over cover. If you know you're fishing in a ledge that has a lot of cover on it, go ahead and leave that weed guard on. You'll still catch some fish with it. That's basically it. You don't need a whole lot of baits when you're fishing offshore, just a handful. If you find ledges of, schools of fish on ledges and you just can't get them to bite and you know they're bass, then you can break out some stuff like a shaky head or drop shot, because those finesse presentations will always get those fish that have been heavily pressured on those schools. Next thing I want to talk about with this is have the right equipment. I use 10-pound test fluorocarbon on my crankbait and a 5-to-1 gear ratio. I use an Abu Garcia Revo winch, and you'll need the lower gear ratio or this thing is going to wear you out. I also use a 7'10" St. Croix Magnum cranker. It's a big rod. You can cast this thing a mile. Casting distance is everything. You're going to cover a lot more water and get your bait deeper. Everything else, I use 16-pound test gamma fluorocarbon. Nothing else. Everything is 16-pound gamma. On my football jig, my big worm, swim bait, and the spoons. With this, I'm going to use a 7.5-foot rod, medium heavy. I use the St. Croix Mojo pitching rod. I get a lot of distance when I'm casting. Again, it's very important when you're fishing offshore to make long casts. The more water you can cover, the better. And those rods will allow you that leverage to get a good hook set on a long cast as well. The big swim bait, I throw this on a 7'10" or a 7'11" swim bait specific rod. I either use the St. Croix Legend Tournament Bass, and I also have a Mojo swim bait rod. But I'm telling you, I can cast twice as far as someone that does not have the right equipment. And I do use a Revo winch on my swim bait also, because I want a slow, steady retrieve. Keep that bait down there. On the crankbait and the swim bait, I use that Revo winch with the lower gear ratio. On everything else, except for the spoon, I use a 6-to-1 gear ratio, so you can take up slack quicker. Now on the spoon, I'm going to go to a high-speed reel, which is the 7-to-1 gear ratio. That way I can take up that slack real fast, because that spoon, when you let it flutter back down, you want to follow that semi-slack line back down. And if a fish smacks it, you're going to see your line jump, and you're going to want to reel that slack up as quick as you can and get that hook set in that fish.